Hello, welcome to lesson 1.5, use a problem-solving plan. Today we're going to go over 4 different equations that you can use to solve different kinds of problems. This is going to be one lesson, and then there will be 2 assignments associated with this lesson. So just a review about how to solve problems, word problems that is. So you want to read and understand it. Identify what you know and what you're trying to find out. I always like underlining. So underlining the different things that I know, or highlighting or circling part of the word problem, and then make a plan. So decide what equation you need to solve the problem and what you need to do. And then carry out your plan. If you are not successful, try a different approach. And then once you've got your answer, look back to make sure that it's reasonable, related to what the question was asking for. And if the question says to include units, especially on Edulastic, then include units. So let's look at our first example. So this says, actually, you know what, let's do the formulas first. So for temperature, the formula that relates Celsius to degrees is C equals 5/9 times F for Fahrenheit minus 32. So as you probably know, Fahrenheit is always greater than Celsius, at least in the type of temperatures that we're used to looking at for the weather outside. So the minus 32 makes sense because the freezing point in Fahrenheit is 32 degrees, but in Celsius it's 0 degrees. And then you multiply by 5/9, that's a fraction less than 1, which always makes Celsius a smaller number than Fahrenheit when you multiply by a fraction that's less than 1. So the other equation that relates Fahrenheit to Celsius is Fahrenheit equals 9/5 Celsius plus 32. The way this makes sense is if you wanted to solve for F, Fahrenheit, you would first multiply by the reciprocal of this fraction, so multiply by 9/5 on both sides. So it'd be 9/5 C, that's where this comes from, and then you would add the 32, so plus 32. And this makes sense because now you're taking the Celsius and you're multiplying it by a fraction greater than 1, which gets a bigger number, and then adding on 32. So those are 2 different equations that relate Celsius and Fahrenheit, depending on what you have. So if you're given Fahrenheit and you want to convert to Celsius, you want to use this equation here. So this one goes from Fahrenheit to Celsius. This one goes from Celsius to Fahrenheit. So the output would be Fahrenheit. Simple interest. So simple interest is I equals PRT, where I is the interest, the amount of interest, so interest in dollars. P is the principal amount in dollars, which is also the original amount. R is your interest rate, written as a decimal. So for example, if the interest rate is 7%, then you would write it as 0.07. If it's 3.5%, you would write it as 0.035. So always write your interest rate as a decimal, not a percentage. And then T is time in years or else specified in the problem. Okay, the distance equation. I like to call this the dirt equation. That's a good way to remember this one. So the dirt equation is distance equals rate times time. And now you see why I called it the dirt equation, because it spells dirt, where the equal sign would be the I. So To get the distance traveled, you multiply your rate times time. So the amount, the speed that you're going at times the time that you're doing it at, and that will give you the amount of distance. If you wanted to rearrange this problem, you could also do distance, the total distance you've traveled divided by the time, and that would give you your rate. Or you could do, you wanted to find the time you were traveling, you would take the distance and divide it by the rate. So notice if you just wanted to solve for r, you would divide by t on both sides. Likewise, if you wanted to solve for t, you divide by r on both sides. So that's how these two equations make sense. And then finally, P for profit. Profit, the total amount you make, is your income. So the amount that your product generates minus the expenses, which is your like starting up cost and how much the actual unit cost to make. So that's how you get the total profit that you make. All right, so let's look at some examples here. So we got to go back to example 1. So it says running. So you can imagine that the equation we're going to be using here would be the dirt equation. Distance equals rate times time. You run in a city. Short blocks are north-south and are 0.1 mile long. So as shown in the diagram here. Long blocks are east-west and are 0.15 mile long. You run 2 blocks east, a number of short blocks south, 2 long blocks west, and back to your start. You want to run 2 miles at a rate of 7 miles per hour. How many short blocks must you run? So the first thing we should do is assign variables. So if we're trying to find the number of short blocks we've gone, let's let that be represented by the letter S. So remember, dirt is distance equals rate times time. So that's similar to this because we have the total number of blocks we've gone. So this is a little bit different than the dirt equation, but it's a similar concept. So the total number of blocks, so number of blocks times the distance per block. And then we want to have it for the short block and the long block, and that should all add up to 2 miles. Okay, so anyways, so the number of short blocks we've gone is S, and each short block is 0.1 mile long. So notice you're only given the amount of long blocks you've gone, not short blocks. So it says you've gone 2 long blocks east, 2 long blocks west. So that'd be 2 plus 2 is 4. So for long blocks, you have 4 times 0.15, the distance per block. Okay, so this would be the equation that we would need. And now let's solve and simplify. So first, I see that we can multiply 4 times 0.15. So this is going to be 0.1s plus 4 times 0.15 would be 0.6. Subtract 0.6. To get 1.4. Divide by 0.1. And you get 14. So total, you would need 14 short blocks. Notice that you didn't use the rate that you were going because it just depended on, it didn't ask for time. It just asked for how many blocks you went. All right, let's look at these examples. So it says you're making a leather book cover. You need a rectangular piece of leather as shown. Find the cost of the piece if leather costs 25 cents per square inch. So find the cost per piece. So we need to find area if we want to find the cost of this whole thing, because it says 25 cents per square inch. That means area, because it would be inches, areas, and units squared. So to find the area of a rectangle, you just need length times width. So for us, our length is 18 and our width is 11. You plug that into your calculator, you get 198 inches squared. So if there are 198 inches squared, you will multiply that by the price, 0.25, plug that in your calculator, and you get a total of $49.50. Okay, so this next one. One day the temperature in Rome, Italy was 30 degrees Celsius. Temperature in Dallas, Texas was 83. Which temperature was higher? So we're going to need one of our equations to convert one of these so that they each match. So let's go ahead and use the first equation that relates Fahrenheit and convert Fahrenheit to Celsius. So Celsius equals 5/9 times 83 minus 32. This would be 5/9 times 51. Now, at this point, this would be a good time to show you how to use the fraction button on your calculator. So many of you have been asking me how to use the fraction button. So let me pull up the calculator. All right, so there are two different ways you can pull up the fraction. The first way, the easiest way, is to do alpha y equals, and then you have a couple options here. The one you want is the first option. It says numerator over denominator, n over d. So press enter, and then we'll type in our fraction, 5/9. And then arrow over to get the cursor out of the denominator. And then you can use parentheses, or you can just say times 51. So that gives you 85/3. So what if we just want to write our answer as a decimal, though? How do you convert it to a decimal? Well, one way to do it is, so we have this as our answer. Go to math, and then the second option, this arrow means convert to. So it says convert to a decimal. So press enter. So it says answer 85/3, convert to a decimal. So press enter. And it says 28.333. Now, if you have an older calculator that doesn't say plus CE, then, or maybe it just says plus, then you're going to need to use the fraction converter if you want to be able to use a fraction. So unfortunately, the older calculators don't have a fraction button like this. But if you did have a decimal like this, and you wanted to convert it to a fraction, then you just do math, and then the first option, convert to fraction, enter. Okay, well, let's say you have 0.1. So what's 0.1 as a fraction? Let's find out. So do math, fraction, convert to fraction, enter, 1/10. Okay, so if you wanted to find what something was converted to a fraction, you would just do that. So that's how you use your fraction button. So anyways, our answer was 28.3 degrees. So that means that it was higher in Italy. All right, one last example. Okay, so it says, I'm gonna have to move this up. One day, Paul ran at a rate. Okay, so rate, we're gonna be using the dirt equation, 0.15 mile per minute for 40 minutes. The next day, Paul and Jen ran together at a rate of 0.16 mile per minute for 50 minutes. How far did Paul run altogether? So we're gonna do his distance on day 1 plus his distance on day 2, and that should equal his total distance. So distance equals rate times time. So we're going to do the rate times time of the first day plus the rate times time of the second day, and that'll be his total. So just plug in what you know. So you know the rate of the first day was 0.15 miles times the minutes was 40, plus the next one would be 0.16 times 50 minutes. And then if you plug all of this into your calculator, you would get 14 miles. So we ran a total of 14 miles over the 2 days. All right, so that is all the examples that we have in class today. And now you're going to go to do the Edge Elastic Part 1 assignment, and then the next day you'll do the Part 2 assignment.